Long before the great flood swept across the earth, a hidden rebellion unfolded in the unseen realms. According to the Book of Enoch, a group of celestial beings known as the Watchers forsook their sacred post in heaven, seduced by the irresistible charm of mortal women. Their divine mandate was to watch over humanity, but driven by intense desire, they crossed a forbidden boundary. Instead of guardians, they became trespassers, binding themselves to human women and giving rise to a race never meant to exist, the Nephilim. These giant offspring, part human and part divine, brought terror upon the earth. Their hunger for domination and bloodshed grew insatiable, plunging the world into chaos and deep corruption. The consequences of this defiance echoed not only through the land but also in the spiritual fabric of creation, as these angelic fathers disrupted the balance between heaven and earth. The Watchers didn't stop at mingling with humans. They passed down forbidden knowledge, arts that should have never touched human hands. They taught warfare, witchcraft, astrology, and the manipulation of nature, unlocking dark secrets that quickened the moral decay of mankind. As the Nephilim spread, they crushed civilizations and filled the world with violence. God's patience waned. According to the narrative, the judgment fell swiftly. The angels who defied heaven were bound and cast into the depths, awaiting final judgment. Their monstrous children were destroyed in the flood, swallowed by the waters. But what of the women, the mothers of these half-divine abominations? Their fate remained an unresolved shadow in the story, seemingly brushed aside. Only in the mysterious chapter 19 of the Book of Enoch do we catch a glimpse of what became of them, a verse that would spark centuries of curiosity and spiritual unease. Chapter 19 offers an eerie insight, as it speaks of the women who lay with the angels being transformed into sirens, beings associated with temptation and destruction. And the women also of the angels who went astray shall become sirens, the text states. This haunting line, often overlooked, introduces a darker chapter in their legacy. Rather than perishing in the flood like the rest of humankind, these women are implied to have survived in another form, carrying forward the spirit of seduction and rebellion. In biblical terms, sirens symbolize voices that lure the soul away from truth, figures of spiritual deception. This interpretation aligns with warnings from Proverbs 7, which describes the seductive woman as a pathway to Sheol. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. Their transformation suggests they were not merely victims or passive participants but became part of a continuing influence that pulls humanity toward ruin. In contrast, the traditional account in Genesis paints a more restrained picture. The sons of God are briefly mentioned taking wives among the daughters of men, and their offspring are the Nephilim, mighty men of old, men of renown. But their destructive nature, the teaching of forbidden arts, and the Watchers' rebellion are absent. Genesis focuses instead on humanity's descent into wickedness. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Genesis 6 verse 5. God's heart was grieved, and he resolved to cleanse the earth through a great flood. The contrast between Genesis and Enoch reveals how one tells the story of human corruption, while the other uncovers a spiritual war in the heavens, involving divine beings who fell from grace and dragged humanity into their fall. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. Yet even among these diverging versions, the flood remains a key turning point. In Enoch's account, the flood is not merely divine judgment on humanity, it's a calculated response to eliminate the Nephilim. God appoints the archangels to carry out his will. Archangel Gabriel, for instance, is tasked with the destruction of the giants, to strike them down and wipe their legacy from the face of the earth. This division of judgment reflects a layered plan, the waters to cleanse the world and the angels to end the unnatural bloodlines. The apocryphal Book of Giants, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, even implies that some Nephilim, like Ohia and Haya, may have initially survived the flood and encountered the primordial Leviathan, only to be later destroyed. This notion reinforces the idea that spiritual consequences endured even after physical destruction. But why bring up the flood in the context of the Nephilim mothers? Because for most readers, that would have seemed the end of their story. If all life was extinguished by the flood, logic suggests these women perished too. Their silence in the Genesis narrative makes it easy to dismiss them. However, the Book of Enoch refuses to leave them behind as forgotten footnotes. The mention of their transformation into sirens suggests something more disturbing. They did not just die, they became vessels of a lingering curse. In ancient tradition, sirens were often associated with spiritual seduction, pulling souls into the depths with their enchanting voices. This metamorphosis turns the mothers of the Nephilim into symbols of enduring temptation, spiritual corruption that outlived the flood and possibly still echoes in the unseen spiritual battles of today. This unsettling detail adds depth to the biblical warnings against spiritual seduction and unholy unions. Consider Revelation 2 verse 20, where the Lord rebukes the church in Thyatira for tolerating Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and by her teaching misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. The spirit behind Jezebel may well be reminiscent of the sirens, a seductive force rooted in rebellion and spiritual compromise. By connecting these ancient beings to the sirens, the Book of Enoch paints the Nephilim mothers not as passive victims but as instruments of continued darkness. It forces us to rethink the cost of spiritual disobedience and how the consequences of sin often ripple far beyond the original act. And yet, amid this dark and mysterious tale, there is a reason for hope. As Psalm 91 verse 11 assures us, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." Even in the face of ancient rebellion, divine protection endures. The story of the Watchers and their offspring is not only one of destruction, it is also a call to discernment, to remain anchored in the truth of God's Word. It reminds us that even when darkness spreads through generations, God's light remains steadfast, and His plan for redemption is never thwarted. The legacy of the Nephilim mothers may echo through history, but the call to righteousness echoes louder. In the shifting sands of ancient manuscripts, where mystery and myth often blur the lines between history and legend, we find one of the most perplexing contradictions in apocryphal literature: the fate of the women who bore the Nephilim, the hybrid offspring of angels and humans described in the Book of Enoch. As we journey through time, from the fragmented Aramaic manuscripts to the Greek translation found in the tomb of a Coptic monk in Panopolis, we uncover not just lost chapters, but a transformation of meaning. The Greek version, possibly translated directly from Aramaic, portrays these women as being turned into sirens, a term echoing with mythological dread. But what did siren really mean to the ancients? Were they condemning these women as temptresses, as eternal threats to men, as spiritual echoes of seduction and doom? Or was this a metaphor crafted by translators to reflect a more sinister punishment, one perhaps not found in the original Aramaic but inferred through the cultural lens of the Greek world? Meanwhile, another path opens in the highlands of Ethiopia, preserved in the ancient Guizi language. The Ethiopian Book of Enoch presents a vastly different destiny for these women, one of peace. According to this tradition, the women who had once been led astray by the Watchers would eventually be restored to tranquility. This portrayal suggests victimhood rather than guilt, a narrative shift that paints the Watchers as the corruptors and the women as passive participants in a cosmic transgression. Such a stark difference reveals more than translation discrepancies. It unveils a theological debate across centuries. Were these women damned or delivered? Were they sirens of destruction or sorrowful mothers seeking peace? It's a question that plunges us into the heart of ancient worldview conflicts and the power of narrative control. Could it be that these contradictory fates reflect the storyteller's intentions more than divine judgment? If we view the Greek version through the lens of Hellenistic culture, the siren is more than a myth. It is a symbol of irresistible, fatal allure. In Homer's Odyssey, sirens lure sailors to their deaths with enchanting songs, part woman, part bird, part death incarnate. This symbolism is powerful and deliberate. By transforming the mothers of the Nephilim into sirens, the Greek text might be implying that these women, through their union with the divine, crossed a line so irreversible that they became forces of destruction in their own right. Their transformation wasn't just punishment, it was metamorphosis. They became beings whose very essence was to tempt and to destroy, echoing the sins that birthed them. Yet, this idea sits uneasily with the Ethiopian account, which seems to mourn the women, not demonize them. The divergence is more than theological, it's moral. One condemns the women as willing seductresses, the other portrays them as victims of a spiritual assault. The contrast becomes even more profound when we examine the language of agency in both accounts. The Greek tells us the women went astray, implying willful rebellion, a choice to seduce the divine. The Ethiopian version says they were led astray, implying innocence corrupted, not intentional sin. This linguistic difference reshapes the entire narrative. In one, the women become responsible agents in a heavenly rebellion. In the other, they are casualties of celestial war. The implications stretch beyond ancient manuscripts. They shape how generations interpret guilt, seduction, and divine justice. Did the Greek translators, perhaps influenced by their cultural mistrust of female autonomy and sexuality, choose to vilify the women more harshly? And did the Ethiopian scribes, closer in tradition to the early Semitic worldview, preserve a softer, more empathetic view of their fate? But what purpose would these sirens serve, even if the transformation were true? The punishment seems retroactive. The unholy union had already occurred. If we consider the siren motif not as literal but symbolic, then perhaps their new form represents spiritual decay, a descent into a state where redemption is no longer possible. Much like the Watchers who, though chained, are still allowed to influence the world through their disembodied spirits, the sirens too may function as instruments of ongoing corruption. This idea aligns eerily well with the structure of chapter 19 of Enoch, where the archangel Uriel explains how the spirits of the Watchers continue to afflict mankind. Placing the sirens directly after this account may not be coincidental. It suggests a parallel fate, a dual corruption. Man and woman, both used by the fallen, both becoming echoes of their sin, set adrift in eternity to mirror each other's fall. The ambiguity surrounding the type of siren these women become only deepens the mystery. Are they the winged, bird-like creatures of the Odyssey, seducing sailors with their song? Or are they the mournful spirits who surround Helen of Troy in her grief, not evil but sorrowful, haunting rather than hunting? Or are they the companions of Persephone, drawn toward the underworld, no longer alive yet not entirely dead, trapped in the liminal space between divine judgment and mortal memory? Each of these forms carries its own symbolism: death, temptation, grief, and each reshapes how we interpret their transformation. If they are mournful companions of the underworld, then perhaps their siren form isn't punishment, but consequence, a sorrow they must carry for all eternity. If they are seductresses, then their punishment is to become what they once tempted. Ultimately, the silence of the original Aramaic on this chapter leaves us with questions, not answers. It opens the door to speculation, to interpretation, to the possibility that what we now read as siren may never have been the original intent. And yet, in that very ambiguity lies the power of this story, its ability to evolve, to be reinterpreted, to reflect the fears and hopes of every age that reads it. The question isn't just what happened to the women of the Nephilim, it's what we want to believe happened. Do we see them as seductresses or as victims? As damned or as delivered? As demons or as daughters lost to a tragedy beyond their control? Perhaps the truth is not found in either text, but in the tension between them. A tension that invites us to question, to imagine, and to seek understanding in the mystery. In a time when divine beings descended to earth and crossed forbidden boundaries, the tale of the Watchers and their human lovers continues to cast a long, haunting shadow over ancient scripture and myth. But what if the story didn't end with the fall of the angels? What if the human women, the mothers of giants, were not forgotten, but transformed into creatures of eternal lamentation? According to the scribes of Panopolis, these women became sirens, not the enchanting muses of the sea that lure sailors to their doom, but mournful entities forever bound to the grief of their celestial lovers. Their transformation wasn't just a punishment, it was a legacy, a symbol of corruption, seduction, and endless sorrow. Yet, the origins of this interpretation remain tangled in the shifting sands of translation, where Greek, Ethiopian, and Semitic traditions all struggle to capture the truth. Were they truly victims, or architects of their own damnation? In one view, these women's transformation into sirens was a poetic consequence of their unnatural union, a haunting echo of the Watchers' fall from grace. They became instruments of corruption, much like the angels they consorted with, luring others into ruin just as they once tempted the divine. Their beauty, once used to seduce heaven, now became a curse upon earth. But in another light, they are mourners, bound in eternal grief, their songs echoing loss, not malice. In the Greek Septuagint, sirens replaced desert creatures like jackals or owls, described in Isaiah as lingering in ruins, crying out in desolation. This connects them not just to temptation but to decay, to the spiritual wilderness left behind when divine order is shattered. The Book of Micah even describes them in tones of wailing and mourning, evoking images of Helen's sirens, who grieved rather than seduced. Yet, was this a theological metaphor? Or was it cultural rebranding for a Hellenistic audience? Consider the cultural lens. The Septuagint was designed to communicate the Hebrew scriptures to a Greek-speaking world, one already steeped in mythological motifs. By inserting sirens, beings familiar to the Hellenistic reader, into prophetic texts, the translators weren't just adapting words, but recontextualizing spiritual realities for a new audience. Similarly, the Greek term Tartarus, found in some Enoch translations, is itself a nod to this adaptation, evoking the deepest pit of Hades. But if the Ethiopian Book of Enoch portrays these women as finding peace, and the Greek versions condemn them as monsters, then what did the original Aramaic narrative say? Was it more neutral? More judgmental? Or did it carry a deeper, more mysterious insight lost in translation? One theory is that the women became Liliths, ancient Babylonian entities known to prey on men and cause miscarriages, echoing the dark femininity of medieval succubi and the vengeance of mythic wronged spirits. The Lilith, or Lilith, while omitted entirely in some Bible translations like the King James Version, makes subtle appearances in others as a screech owl or night creature, lingering in wastelands. In Jewish mysticism and Talmudic lore, she becomes a symbol of terror, both seductress and destroyer. Unlike the mournful sirens, she is active, aggressive, and unapologetic. This image presents a stark contrast, a divine judgment that either pacified these women into mourners or twisted them into predators. Yet in all versions, be they sirens, Liliths, or forgotten entirely, there remains a troubling silence about God's motive. Why were they transformed at all? Were they guilty of enticing angels, or merely collateral damage in a cosmic rebellion? Why do some traditions afford them peace, while others curse them with monstrous forms? And most importantly, why is their fate missing from so many other ancient texts like the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Giants, or the Zohar? Could it be that their monstrous transformation was a narrative convenience, used to personify temptation or represent unchecked femininity in ancient patriarchal cultures? Or perhaps the scribes of Panopolis, living in a syncretic world of Egyptian, Greek, and Semitic ideas, chose to insert familiar myths to bridge the gap between faiths. Maybe the sirens were never meant to be literal beings, but metaphors, representations of sorrow, chaos, and the lasting consequences of divine transgression. Yet if that's true, why do so many readers today still feel a visceral sense of injustice in these women's portrayal? If they were deceived, why are they cursed? If they were complicit, why are their intentions never explored? The inconsistencies are not just academic, they are theological, emotional, and deeply spiritual. And they reveal a void where answers should be. A silence as loud as the sirens' wail in the ruins of ancient civilizations. The question that haunts us then is not just what happened to these women, but why does their fate remain so ambiguous? In the absence of a clear judgment or redemption, they linger in our imagination as half-formed symbols, trapped between myth and scripture, between punishment and peace. Their voices, be they songs of mourning, shrieks of terror, or whispers of temptation, still echo through the pages of ancient texts, unresolved and unexplained. Were they monsters, victims, or something else entirely? Perhaps the answer lies not in any single version of the tale, but in the tension between them all, a divine mystery meant to provoke, unsettle, and awaken. And maybe that's the true role of the siren in biblical myth, not to offer clarity, but to call us deeper into the waters of mystery.